Hello everyone, GoldenNova here. It's the last week of the month and that means it's Patron week. That's right, every month, members of my Patreon have a chance to vote on what I cover that month. And I'll let you know what the choices are for next month later in the video. And of the choices provided this month, Buster Blader came out on top. Another member of Yu-Gi-Moto's impressive roster of personalities, Buster Blader has been around since Battle City, and has continued to take up space in the zeitgeist of the Yu-Gi-Oh community almost entirely off the back of their cool armor and effect. Because if we judge it solely off their appearances in the anime, they aren't that exciting. But think about it, Dragon is one of, if not the, biggest and most supported types in the game. In fact, one of the best decks in recent memory is a combo deck that's held together not by archetypal synergy, but by the broad effects that benefit dragons as a whole. Heck, they arguably made a whole new type just so they could keep printing dragon-esque cards without having to deal with how they would interact with dragons proper. So when you have a monster that's a big middle finger to the dominance of the dragon type, it's gonna resonate with a lot of people who maybe think fish ought to get some attention. Or insect. Or some other type. I swear, it's on the tip of my pyro. However, despite their power and widespread appeal, dragons don't make up the entirety of the competitive landscape. So much like in the real world, you aren't gonna get far in competitions if hating one specific thing is your whole deal. It's honestly kind of boring. To that end, new Buster Blader support would be released that diversified the types you could wail on, as well as tools to put a damper on specific playstyles. All before going full circle and doubling down on the anti-dragon plan by making all your opponent's monsters dragons. I think they might have walked away with the wrong message on this. And what makes it worse is that it's actually good? Like, unironically, full stop, Buster Blader has some bafflingly powerful plays that lock your opponent out of the game one turn before OTKing them the next, and now it's time they got their time in the spotlight. We'll go through our trophy room to reminisce about the glory days, upgrade our gear so we can go monster hunting, then see which of our spoils we can use to make that gear even better. It's time to carve in to Buster Blader. But before we continue, a quick reminder to please like and subscribe if you've enjoyed my content so far. We've blasted past the previous goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, but like one of the most powerful Utopia cards, I'm going all in. Double or nothing. And if we get to 10,000 subscribers, I'll cover that card as well as many others in Utopia Explained. We've also got our Discord, where I've finally gotten Yu-Gi-Oh players to go outside and touch some grass with some premium lawn care discourse, and a Twitter where you can stay up to date on channel news and my bad takes. And if you really like what I do here, please consider joining my YouTube membership. It's basically like a Twitch sub, or backing me on Patreon so you can get your name in the credits, as well as help determine future Explained videos that I make, like this one. Pledge $10 or more by the end of this month, and you'll get to vote between Weather Painters, Nephthys, Sylvans, and Lunalights. Thank you all so much for watching, and now, back to the video. So, what's the deal with Buster Blader? Well, it's pretty easy actually. They're a level 7 Earth Warrior monster with 2600 attack and 2300 defense, and gains 500 attack for each dragon your opponent controls or is in their grave. This gets them immediately big enough to take on the ominous Blue Eyes White Dragon at the side of a single scaled adversary, but you aren't going to be seeing many more monsters like him. That's because it would be more accurate to say we're covering two archetypes today. Buster Blader and their associated support from before the core set Breakers of Shadow, and then all the new cards that came afterwards, under the umbrella of the Destruction Sword cards. So let's bust open some more original Buster Blader cards before moving on to the new stuff. Skilled White Magician is a level 4 light spellcaster monster with 1700 attack and 1900 defense, and like all of Endymion's favorite underlings, gains a spell counter every time a spell card resolves. And like the other members of the Skilled Magician cycle, you contribute them while they have 3 spell counters on them to summon their associated monster, in this case Buster Blader, from your hand, deck, or grave. Not necessarily worth considering for deck building purposes, but from a world building perspective, this card is fascinating. I'm sure we'll get into this again sometime in the future, but this isn't some kind of generic spell energy. No, Skilled White Magician is covered in Endymion brand Power Stones. So if the Skilled Magicians are all part of the Magical Cities world, that means cards like Buster Blader, Summon Skull, Gaia the Fierce Knight, and the iconic Dark Magician share the same landscape as Endymion and Alistair. Why don't we have a master guide that explains that yet? Emblem of Dragon Destroyer is a normal spell that grabs you Buster Blader from your deck or grave. It's just a very specific tutor that helps put a big level 7 dingus in your hand, but doesn't do much else to deploy them, which is rather emblematic of the issues with older card design. Miracle Restoring is a bit more helpful. It's a normal trap that removes 2 spell counters from your side of the field, then has you targeting a Dark Magician or Buster Blader in your grave and special summoning it. There we go again with the spell counters. What is the deal here? They're not a spellcaster, so what are they used for? Crafting? Enchanting? Do they spend it as currency? I need answers. This will likely come up again when we cover Dark Magician, but I certainly couldn't pass up the opportunity to talk about Dark Paladin. They're a level 8 Dark Spellcaster fusion monster with 2900 attack and 2400 defense, requiring Dark Magician and Buster Blader as material. They must be fusion summoned, and when a spell card is activated, you can discard a card to negate and destroy it, though Dark Paladin does have to be face up on the field to activate and resolve that effect. It's also inherited Buster Blader's Dragon-reliant attack boost, but the twist here is that it counts both players' field and grave. So if you build your deck right, they can still skyrocket in attack without having to rely on your opponent. Now, if anything about this card feels strangely familiar, from the artwork to the effect, then try squinting your eyes and try to remember the most frustrating, abysmal duel you've ever been in. There you go, Dark Paladin feels a lot like the test build for Dragoon, packing negation and attack boosting, and even uses Dark Magician as material. But since this card comes nowhere close to being a game-changing threat, I'm more than happy to call this card my Paladin. Technically, this next card came out with the rest of the Breakers of Shadow support, but it doesn't really line up with the rest of it. Toon Buster Blader has all the same stats as original Buster Blader, but they're of the Toon subtype, and because of that, they can't attack the turn they're summoned, but they do have the effect to attack directly if you control Toon World and your opponent doesn't control any Toon monsters. But a big improvement is that, unlike older models, it doesn't automatically explode if Toon World does. So while it's not useful in a Buster Blader deck per se, it is a really fun way to scare a Dragon Link player that's gotten a bit too comfortable loading up their grave when playing Pegasus's favorite deck. It'll certainly get them to sing a different tune. Okay, now it's time to talk about modern Buster Blader. Everything before this point has been kind of a mishmash, but now we have a much more cohesive game plan to work with. So let's start with the remix of an old classic. Buster Blader, the Destruction Swordmaster, also shares all the same stats as original Buster Blader, but swaps out their attack boosting effect for much broader applications. Their name becomes Buster Blader while on the field or in the grave, which is very important for effects that support Buster Blader specifically, and not Buster Blader monsters. If any number of monsters your opponent controls is destroyed by battle or card effect from anyone and sent to the grave, you can target one of those monsters and equip it to Buster Blader as an equip card, and once per turn, you can send a monster card you control that's equipped to this Buster Blader to destroy all monsters your opponent controls with the same type as the monster sent to the grave. Monotype decks beware, the Destruction Swordmaster is gonna bring you a scare and make all your monsters despair. Because while you can only activate your best impression of Tribe Infecting Virus once per turn, there's no cap to the amount of times you can equip monsters that get destroyed. So once you get the ball rolling, it'll be very hard to stop. Unless, of course, your opponent is actively playing under There Can Be Only One, then there's a bit of an issue. Also, while this is a retrain, make sure to use this Buster Blader and not mistake it for longtime Vanguard icon, Blaster Blade. That joke was for you, Jello. Darn you for getting me into Vanguard! Next, we have the most unexpected companion for a dragon-slaying swordmaster, a tiny dragon. Everyone, meet Buster Whelp of the Destruction Swordmaster. They're a level 1 light dragon tuner monster with 400 attack and 300 defense, and when normal summoned, you can add a Destruction Sword card from your deck to your hand. You can also tribute them to special summon a Buster Blader specifically from your hand or grave, and if they're in your grave and you control Buster Blader, you can discard a Destruction Sword card to special summon them, but you can only use one of these last 2 effects per turn, and only once per turn. Whelp makes for a great Stratos that either becomes or supports Buster Blader. We'll get into the synchro you're meant to summon with them later on, but for now, alongside its very useful effect, they're just so gosh darn cute! They certainly put the baby in Baby Dwagon. But they aren't just an adorable little pile of fur and scales that I want like 80 plushies of, they're also here to help, fetching Buster Blader's various swords to fight off their ever-changing quarry. These next 3 are all Dark attribute, and share an effect where they can target a Buster Blader you control while they're in the hand or on your field, and equip themselves to that monster, providing a continuous effect as well as an effect that detaches them for a more short-term bonus. Let's start with the troublemaker themselves, Dragon Buster Destruction Sword. They're a level 1 Dragon Tuner monster with 400 attack and 300 defense, and while equipped to a monster, your opponent cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. Also, while equipped to a monster, you can special summon Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, so hey, free tuner. Now, it's at this point I should note that the continuous effects of the Lil Ultimate Destruction Swords don't care how they're equipped to a monster, say like from their own effect, just that they are equipped. This caused a heck of a problem when they were in the same format as Union Carrier, where you could just slap this bundle of joy onto any dark or dragon monster you could field. It even spent some time on the Forbidden list itself before they swapped them out with Union Carrier, and while I don't think this card should have come off anyway, it was definitely the right choice to get that Betreaded Menace out of the game. And thankfully, Dragon Buster hasn't been meaningfully splashed in anything since, so that means you have access to an extra deck lock going first, which can be brutal against a ton of decks. However, it is laughably ineffective against others. Don't be surprised if your opponent starts turn 2 with a hearty laugh before discarding Eldritch and a Hakero. Wizard Buster Destruction Sword is a level 3 spellcaster monster with 1200 attack and 900 defense. While equipped to a monster, monsters in your opponent's grave cannot activate their effects, and you can send them to the grave as an equipped card to target a Destruction Sword monster in your grave except another copy of itself, and add it to your hand. Being able to recycle your cards is always a nice option, but I'd like to draw attention to the first effect, because while it's not explicitly stated, I'd like to think that this card and the next one were made as explicit counters to popular strategies at the time. For instance, it's an anti-wizard or spellcaster card, and a big spellcaster deck that was doing nicely at the time was Shadal's. If Wizard Buster was active and your opponent threw 2 material from their deck to the grave with something like Shadal Fusion, then they'd still get to summon the fusion monster, but get no value from the monster sent to the grave as material. And, it should be noted, the dual swords in the art have the Endymion brand Power Stones, which makes it pretty canon that Buster Blader is in the same universe as Alistair and the Magistus, and I have got to change the subject before this turns into an entirely different video. Robot Buster Destruction Sword is a level 4 machine monster with 1600 attack and 1200 defense. When equipped to a monster, spells and traps that are already face up on your opponent's side of the field cannot activate their effects. You can also send them to the grave while they're an equipped card to grant the monster it was equipped to 1000 attack until the end of the turn. A nifty little attack boost, though it does feel a little out of place, considering this is the deck with a boss monster that's meant to get enormous all on its own effect. But enough stalling to give you all the time to guess what Robot Buster is referencing, it's Clifford's. The wording is very specific here, stopping spells and traps that are already face up on the field. So normal spells and traps are fine, and even activating a continuous traps effect as part of activating the card is clear. But if you don't have an on-activation effect, then you're locked out. No more paying 8 to search a Klee with Scout, no activating Hidden City to flip up a Guru, and certainly no paying 8 to search an Eldritch with Cursed Eldland. Though, it doesn't negate the effects of spells and traps already on the field, so it's not going to be of any help against floodgates like Rivalry of Warlords and Mystic Mine. But I guess that just shows their camaraderie. This deck already has its fair share of in-engine floodgates, so I think it's like a solidarity thing. That's it for our main deck monsters, but now it's time for the big payoffs, the extra deck. Let's start with the synchro I was going on about earlier, Buster Dragon. They're a level 8 Dark Dragon monster with 1200 attack and 2800 defense, requiring generic material. It turns all of your opponent's monsters into dragons, and once per turn, if you don't control any Buster Blader monster, you can target a monster named Buster Blader in your grave and special summon it. And that's not all, because as a quick effect during your opponent's turn, you can target a Buster Blader monster you control and equip it with any Destruction Sword monster from your grave. So we've got a pretty nifty play sequence here. Find a way to get Buster Blader onto the board, perhaps by attributing Buster Whelp, then equip them with Dragon Buster Destruction Sword, which you can then special summon to give you the material you need to synchro Buster Dragon. Then, you use said dragon to revive Buster Blader, and on your opponent's turn, you just snap the Dragon Buster Sword onto that Buster Blader, and you've locked out your opponent's extra. It's unfortunately a bit difficult to accomplish. Buster Whelp's normal summon effect can search you the Destruction Sword version of Buster Blader, but can't special summon it out of your hand. But there are a ton of discard outlets in the theme, so you'll probably find a way to vent them sooner or later so they can become a valid target. And once they're in circulation, Buster Dragon is a great way to keep your game plan online fine, while attaching floodgates is needed to really bust your opponent's chops. And they're even more effective when paired with Buster Blader, the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman. They're a level 8 Light Warrior fusion monster with 2800 attack and 2500 defense, requiring Buster Blader and any dragon monster as fusion material. They must be fusion summoned and cannot be summoned by other ways. They also can't attack directly. However, they do gain 1000 attack and defense for each dragon-type monster your opponent controls or is in their grave. They've also bought that cool Dragon Capture Jar mug, so all of your opponent's dragon monsters are switched to defense position while the Dragon Destroyer Swordsman is on the field, and the effects of any dragon in your opponent's possession can't be activated. Not on the field, in the hand, or in the grave. Not even the banished zone is safe. And while this buster can't attack directly, they do deal piercing battle damage. This card is a house, invalidating an entire monster type all on its own, and things get even worse for your opponent once you pair them with Buster Dragon. Now, all of your opponent's monsters are dragons, so everything will cower in fear of this absolutely stacked Swordmaster. I mean, sure, Lynx will stay in attack position, but their effects are still offline, so it's not going to be much of a consolation. It disables boards, does titanic amounts of damage, and is easily one of the top 5 monsters I want to cosplay. Look at that sword! It's so impractical, which makes it even cooler. We've also got another extra deck monster type, Protector Whelp of the Destruction Swordsman. They're a Link 2 Light Dragon monster with 400 attack, requiring any 2 monsters as material. If Link summoned, you can send a Destruction Sword card from your deck to the grave, then you can special summon a Buster Blader monster from your hand, which is great, because this means you can summon the Destruction Swordmaster version of Buster Blader with this. We've also got some great grave effects we can utilize with the cards we'll be sending with the first part of the effect. Also, as a bit of a bonus, during the end of your battle phase, if your opponent controls no monsters, you can target a Buster Blader monster you control that didn't declare an attack this turn, and burn your opponent for damage equal to that Buster Blader's attack. This is in place to keep your opponent from just not committing monsters to the board against your Buster Blader fusion to stall out. Since it can't attack directly, a good strategy might have been to not summon anything until you had enough resources to retaliate. But with Protector Whelp, that's no longer an option, essentially granting it the ability to attack directly with that ginormous attack stat. And since it activates at the end of the battle phase, it occupies a space in the game I like to call the Gladiator Beast Zone, and any effect that happens then is alright by me. Okay, that's all the monsters, now it's time for the spells and traps, and I can't think of a better one to start with than the one that helps get us into our biggest, most busty of bladers, than Destruction Swordsman Fusion. It's a quick play spell that can fusion summon any fusion monster from your extra deck that lists Buster Blader as material, using monsters from your hand or either side of the field as material. Also, if Destruction Swordsman Fusion is in your grave, you can send a card from your hand to the grave to add it to your hand. So yeah, get Buster Dragon onto the field, and this turns into a super polymerization that can use any of your opponent's monsters. You could also use this to make Dark Paladin, so if you just so happen to fall into the Dark Magician matchup at your next tournament, you'll be well prepared. Karma of the Destruction Swordsman is another quick play spell that targets up to 3 monsters of the same type in your opponent's grave. You banish them, and if you do, a Buster Blader or Destruction Sword monster you control gains 500 attack and defense for each of those banished monsters until the end of the turn. It's also like Destruction Swordsman Fusion, where you can grab it out of your grave, but you discard the card this time, not send, and it has to be a Destruction Sword card. This kinda brings the classic effect of Buster Blader to their Destruction Swordsman form and any of their tiny companions. It's also effectively a DD Crow that can be activated in the damage step, so any grave triggers that hide in that very slim activation window are safe no longer. Karma may be a strange name for this card, but it's all tied into Buster Blader's decision to adopt their little Buster Whelp. It's kinda like what happens when you take on the responsibility of caring for any dangerous animal. They grow up and want to test their newfound might by razing a village to the ground, causing untold pain and suffering to generations of villagers as their name echoes through hushed and worried tales of the vicious shadow that haunts the countryside with its dragonic malice. It's just a natural part of their development. Prologue of the Destruction Sword is a normal trap that has you sending a Buster Blader monster and a Destruction Sword card, except another copy of itself, from your deck to the grave to special summon a Buster Dragon from your extra deck or grave, but it's destroyed during the end phase of the next turn. You can also banish Prologue from your grave to prevent the destruction of your Destruction Sword cards by battle or card effect for that turn. So hey, You ever worry about not being able to get the materials on board to make Buster Dragon? No worries, Prologue does it for you. And since it can revive all of the component parts that you sent to the grave, you can set things up to make a Buster Dragon that'll stick around longer than the Prologue version. Or heck, just spring this on your opponent while you have a Fusion Buster Blader to defang a board out of nowhere. Which sounds a bit too much like a rising action to be put into a story's prologue, but maybe they're going for some experimental storytelling. Destruction Sword Memories is another normal trap that has you discarding a Destruction Sword card to special summon a Buster Blader monster from your deck. You can also banish it from your grave to fusion summon Buster Blader, the dragon-destroying swordsman, from your extra deck by banishing fusion material from your grave. Remember when I said you could send some wacky stuff to the grave with Protector Whelp? Well, this is one of them. Combined with Prologue sending all the necessary material for Fusion Buster Blader, and you've got yourself a full Monster Zone lock that puts 2 massive monsters on board. And you can also use it for its regular effect to get a nifty Buster Blader, but that resolves as a -1, and the grave effect is a Miracle Fusion for the sweetest suit of power armor I've ever seen while having no impact on your card economy. And if I remember correctly, that seems like the better deal. Destruction Sword Flash is the ultimate finishing move at our disposal. If you control a fusion monster that lists Buster Blader as material, you can activate it to banish all of your opponent's monsters. Perfect for clearing the field for a big burn from Protector Whelp. Though it does suck that none of those monsters will help towards the attack boost of Fusion Buster Blader from the banished zone. Also, while it's in the grave, if any card or effect targets any number of Buster Blader monsters you control, you can banish Flash from your grave to negate and destroy that card. Whether you search it up with Buster Whelp to give your fusion a bit more oomph, or send it to the grave with Buster Whelp to keep your Buster Bladers safe, Flash has your back in a number of different scenarios to keep your win condition going. Well, it did have your back. Ever since the new year though, Flash just hasn't been the same. So that's all the Buster Blader cards, but what do we do with them? Well, the game plan is pretty simple. Summon our big bosses, block our opponent out of stuff, punch big for game. We're all in on control, which is great because our big boss has all the attack power we need to close out the game at a moment's notice, so every other card in our deck can be geared towards slowing our opponent down so they can't best the Blader. But what can we play to help them out? Well, if you don't mind playing some of the most powerful modern cards ever printed, and money is no object, the Dogmatica engine pairs perfectly with this deck. Binning Titaniclad with Nadir's Servant not only gives you access to that whole game plan, you're also getting a dragon into the grave to use for the fusion effect of Memories. And since you'll be able to do that on your opponent's turn, as long as you aren't under the lingering effects of Dogmatica Punishment, you can summon your most important monster on your opponent's turn. I want to say it's really strange that these two themes work together so well, but to be fair, it was hinted at in the lore. Buster Blader seems to team up with dragons anyway, and is already on good enough terms with spellcasters to get Power Stones, so it all lines up. Jack in the Hand makes for a nifty searcher in this deck. We've already got 2 level 1s in our deck by way of Buster Whelp and Dragon Buster, and while we no longer have access to powerful level 1 one-card combos like Blow Up Bulb and Jet Synchron, we do still have a ton of monsters that special summon themselves as free material, like Jester Confit, Tenny Adhara, or Bones Alone. It's no longer the no matter what you pick, I win type scenario, but your opponent isn't likely to know the matchup well enough to pick correctly. You could say they don't know Jack. As for a silly tech pick, well, we're already running a DNA surgery on legs, but it's such a shame that they only count as dragons on the field, right? Once they leave the field, they can no longer serve to enhance the greatness of the dragon-destroying swordsman. Why should something so trivial as, death, keep you from bending a knee to their majesty? Well, now they can with the power of Rebirth Judgment. That's right, the power to change types in the grave that had previously been held only by zombies can now be used by anyone thanks to this previously anime-exclusive card. Turn your opponent's entire grave into dragons, and watch as Fusion Buster Blader's attack skyrockets. And yeah, that's a bit dirtily, but A, I would say a monster that pierces gaining that much attack is worth a single card investment, and B, it's more places where monsters won't be able to activate their effects while you have Fusion Buster Blader. And the more places you can stop your opponent from mounting a counteroffensive, the better. And that's all I have to say on Buster Blader. It's a theme that's oddly come into its own, boasting powerful control options, cheap and efficient combos, and a very reasonable price point, supplemental engines notwithstanding. I think it goes to show that, much in contrast to the Face Card Knights, when Yugi's monsters are free to chart their own path, instead of being weighed down by legacy expectations, they can stand in the competitive ring with the best of them, using their incomparable attack power to overwhelp their opponent. But now, I want to hear what you all have to say. Do you agree that we've hunted down a good archetype, or are we gonna have to run this mission a few more times because this monster just won't drop a plate? Seriously, it's the last thing I need to complete this armor set, and I keep getting rubies for some reason, which are even rarer, and I don't understand why it just won't. Make sure to let me know in the comments, and if you haven't already, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video around. It really does a lot to help me out. I'd also like to take this time to thank my lovely patrons, including this month's illustrious Quasar Commander, J. Yuri Boy, as well as Nebula Navigators, the Wizard Moose, and the Fresh Prince of Conair, our Cosmic Crusaders, Chaz Ghost, Colin Todd, Panda PLS, Legendary Raven, and Shep Shao Shep, as well as the lovely Starlight Explorers you see on screen now. If you like what you saw and want to fund the future of this channel, please consider joining as a YouTube member. It's basically like a Twitch sub, or supporting me on Patreon, all of which come with some pretty sweet perks. Remember, join at the $10 tier by the end of July, and you'll be able to cast your vote for either Nephthys, Weather Painters, Sylvans, or Lunalights. And if my previous mention of the Face Card Knights intrigued you, follow this link to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.